I thought people were listening when they nodded and smiled. Over time, I realized they were just waiting for me to stop talking, and that quiet truth changed everything. You ever notice how some silences feel louder than others? I mean the kind that happens right after you finish speaking, when no one really reacts. They just nod or say, yeah, like they are checking a box. That silence used to confuse me. Now, I recognize it for what it is. That was the sound of people waiting for me to stop talking. It started with little things. One time, I was at a family dinner at my brother's place. His wife was talking about school zoning or some kind of neighborhood policy. I do not even remember the details. I chimed in, trying to share something I had read about that actually tied into her point. I laid it out neatly, thinking I was contributing. But before I even got to the second sentence, she blinked and said, anyway, like I was saying, and just kept going. No acknowledgement. Not even a polite, oh, interesting. I sat there with a fork halfway to my mouth, like an idiot. My brother just nodded along with her. Nobody seemed to notice I had even tried to speak. Again, I chalked it up to timing. Maybe I had interrupted. Maybe it was my tone. Maybe I just said it weird. There was always a maybe. A week later at work, something similar happened. We were on a video call about budget planning. I had been quiet most of the meeting, listening. Then I finally unmuted myself to give some feedback. It was about a tiny detail, nothing earth-shattering, but I figured it would help. I was mid-sentence when one of the guys, Tim, cut in and started talking over me, like I had never started at all. No sorry, go ahead, no recognition. Just steamrolled right through. The worst part? Everyone followed his lead. The meeting kept rolling, and I just went silent again, staring at my own face in the corner of the screen, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. Was I boring? Was my voice too soft? Did I talk too slowly? I remember thinking, maybe this is just how people are. Maybe I need to speak louder, stronger, clearer. But deep down, a weird feeling had started to crawl into my chest. Not quite anger, not quite sadness. Just that cold, sinking sense that I was not really there to them. Like I was a commercial break they had to sit through before the real show came back on. And the thing that bothered me the most? I could not explain it. Not yet. But that was about to change. Because the next time it happened, it was not subtle. And it was not forgettable. A few days later, I was out with my friend Marcus. We had not seen each other in months, so I figured we would catch up, maybe shoot some pool, grab a burger. Nothing deep. Just two guys hanging out. But something felt off right from the start. He kept checking his phone, nodding like he was listening, but not really there. You know what I mean? That look where someone's eyes flick toward the TV behind you more than your face. We were at this bar near his apartment, and while I was talking about a recent move I was considering, something kind of important to me, he cut in mid-sentence to say, dude, did you see that dunk? I blinked. What? He pointed at the screen. That guy flew, man. I forced a laugh. Yeah, crazy. Then I sat back and let the topic die right there. No use trying to rewind. He had already moved on. And that was the pattern. I would say something, anything, with care, hoping to connect. He would jump in with a different topic, like his brain had just been idling in neutral until my mouth stopped moving. I tested it a little, started talking about a book I had read. Halfway through, I paused mid-thought. Just stop talking. He nodded, took a sip of his drink, and said, right? Man, you got to come to this party next week. Girls, music, everything. Like I had finished. Like I had said something worth responding to, even though I had not even made my point yet. It hit me then. He was not really hearing me. He was just waiting for the gaps. I let the silence hang between us. He did not notice. Just kept going. I think that was the first time I saw it for what it was. Not a fluke, not a misunderstanding, but a pattern. And it was not just Marcus. It was people in general. Friends, co-workers, family. I started thinking back. Like the time I was at my cousin's baby shower, explaining to my aunt why I had chosen to change careers. I had taken a risk, left a decent job, and was trying to build something on my own. Halfway through my explanation, she smiled and said, well, as long as you're happy. Then immediately asked if I had gained weight. It felt like I had brought her a painting, and she used the frame for her mirror. I wanted to believe I was wrong. That maybe I just picked bad moments. That maybe people did care, they just did not show it well. But deep down, something had started to ache. It was like throwing pebbles into a well and never hearing a splash. At first, I blamed myself. Thought maybe I was the common denominator. Maybe I was boring. Maybe I came off too serious, Or maybe my voice had that droning, background hum quality. Like a fridge running, always there, never noticed. So I made changes. I started listening to how other people talked, especially the ones who always seemed to be the center of attention. I watched how they told stories. The rhythm, the timing, the pauses. I practiced it, lightened my tone, threw in a few more jokes, smiled more when I spoke. It worked. For a minute, people laughed more, responded quicker, but still, it felt shallow. I would finish talking, and nobody would ask questions. No one followed up. They laughed, they nodded, they moved on. It was like I had become an actor in my own conversations, playing the role of relatable guy, just to buy some attention that never stayed. One day, at work, we had this big team meeting. Maybe 15 of us crammed into a conference room with stale coffee and too much cologne in the air. We were brainstorming ideas for a new campaign, and I had actually stayed up late sketching out a rough concept. Something visual, something bold. I had notes. I had a damn slideshow. I waited for the right moment, then jumped in with, what if we flipped the whole framing? Made the customer the hero, not the product. There was a beat. People looked around. Then Jenna said, kind of like what Netflix did last year, right? Everyone nodded. Someone added, yeah, we could use that influencer angle again. And just like that, my idea got tossed into the group blender without even a glance in my direction. Later that day, the manager pulled me aside and said, hey, thanks for staying engaged. I know you don't always speak up. I had to bite my tongue not to laugh. Engaged? I had practically gift-wrapped the main pitch. They just rerouted it, reworded it, and acted like it showed up on the table by accident. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the ceiling. I could still hear the chatter from the bar below my window, the muffled bass of someone's stereo pulsing through the wall. I tried calling my mom. She picked up on the third ring. I told her I had been feeling a little off lately, like I was disappearing a bit. She said, oh, sweetie, do not worry. Everyone feels that way sometimes. Then launched into a 10-minute story about how my cousin Lindsay was learning pottery. I listened. I nodded. I made the right noises. And that was the moment I felt it flip, like I was watching myself from the outside. I was doing to her what they had done to me, just waiting for the story to end. I stopped trying so hard after that. Not all at once, just a little here and there. I would be in a group chat, someone would ask a question, and I would type out a full reply. Careful, clear, thoughtful. Then I would delete half of it. Then all of it. I started just reacting with thumbs ups or LOL, or nothing at all. No one seemed to notice the difference. At work, I showed up, I nodded in meetings, I did what was expected. I stopped volunteering ideas. And the weird part? Everything kept running just fine without me speaking. It started to wear me down. Not in some dramatic, collapse on the floor kind of way. More like erosion. Quiet, constant dull. The emotional version of wind slowly smoothing a rock. I noticed it most in my body. I was tired all the time, even when I slept. My shoulders stayed tense, like I was bracing for something that never came. I would go hours without saying a word and not even realize it. One night, I was sitting with Emily, my girlfriend at the time, on the couch. We had this tradition where we would make popcorn, curl up, and pick something random to watch. That night, she kept scrolling through options, asking me what I felt like watching. I said, I am good with whatever. She picked something. 10 minutes in, she looked over and said, you've been really quiet lately. I nodded. Just tired. She paused the movie. Are you mad at me? I shook my head. No, not at all. Then she said, you don't talk to me like you used to. That hit harder than I expected. Because I wanted to say something. I really did. I wanted to explain everything. The meetings, the interruptions, the way I had started feeling invisible even when I was in the middle of a conversation. I wanted to tell her how I was worn down by all the effort it took to be understood. But I knew how it would go. She would say, that's not true. She would tell me I was overthinking. She would remind me of all the ways people had shown they cared, just not in the ways I needed. She would give advice, like she always did, before I even finished unpacking the first layer of what I was trying to say. So I looked at her, and all I managed was, I just don't have the energy to explain it again. She gave me a soft frown, like I had let her down. Then she unpaused the movie. We watched in silence, side by side, both pretending we were still in it. But I was already somewhere else. Somewhere far behind my own voice, dragging it like a suitcase no one ever bothered to open. The moment it all made sense came in the middle of the most ordinary day. No breakdown, no drama. Just a Tuesday morning and a coffee that had gone cold on my desk. I was on a call with my manager, Caitlin, going over some client feedback. She was reading off notes, fast and clipped, her voice full of that forced cheer people use when they are barely holding it together. I was listening, nodding, taking it in. Then she said something that was flat out wrong. She claimed the client hated the layout I had pitched. But I remembered that call. The client had actually liked the layout. They had asked for a few tweaks, but said, "This is exactly the direction we were hoping for." So I spoke up. I said, "Actually, I think they were happy with the core design. They just wanted the call to action in a different spot." There was a pause. She blinked. I could hear her mouse clicking, probably scrolling through her notes. Then she said, Right. Anyway, like I was saying, just like that, like I had not spoken. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. She kept talking, but my mind had drifted off. That was the moment. Right there. It was not about my voice. It was not about how I said things. It was not about being too quiet or too emotional or too slow or too anything. It was this. People were not listening to me. They were waiting for me to stop talking. And the difference between those two things? It is massive. One is connection. The other is performance. I had been performing. Performing clarity. Performing patience. Performing relatability. All while they sat in the audience with their arms crossed, waiting for intermission. That realization hit harder than any insult I had ever heard. Because it was not loud. It was not cruel. It was just neglect. The kind you cannot point at. The kind that makes you feel like the problem. I thought about every conversation where someone smiled and nodded, only to respond with something that had nothing to do with what I said. Every moment I paused to gather my thoughts, only to be cut off. Every time someone said, "I hear you," and then proved they did not. It had not been random. It had been happening for years. And I had been swallowing it, brushing it off, adapting myself around it. But now I could finally see it. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I did not confront anyone. There was no big speech, no dramatic exit. That kind of thing looks good in movies, but in real life? It just gives people another excuse to call you sensitive, or difficult, or cold. No, I went quieter. Not in a bitter way. Not at first. I just adjusted. I stopped repeating myself when someone clearly was not listening. If they missed it the first time, that was on them. I stopped chasing after clarity like it was my job to make people understand. I stopped rushing to fill every pause with more explanation, more context, more softness to make my words easier to swallow. I started letting silence sit there. If I said something and no one responded, I let it hang. I did not rescue the moment. I did not follow up with, "Does that make sense?" Or, "Just to be clear." I let them decide if they were paying attention. At first, it threw people off. Some of them would circle back and ask, "Wait, what were you saying earlier?" Others just moved on, not even realizing anything had changed. And that told me everything I needed to know. I remember one day in the break room at work. Tim, the guy who always talked over me, was telling a story about some concert he had gone to. He looked at me and said, "You ever been to one of those?" I shrugged. Yeah, that was it. Just yeah. He waited, expecting more. I could see it. That slight tilt of the head, that awkward chuckle. Like he was holding open a door I had no intention of walking through. Eventually, he filled the silence himself, launching into a new story like it never happened. And me? I felt nothing. No pressure. No guilt. No sense of missed opportunity. Just relief. It was strange. The less I explained myself, the calmer I felt. I started to realize that a lot of my exhaustion was not from people. It was from trying to get people to receive me, to see me, to meet me halfway. I had been speaking in full sentences to people who only heard headlines. Now, I spoke when I wanted to. When I had something to offer, not something to prove. Not everyone noticed the shift. Emily did. One night she asked if I was pulling away. I said, "I think I'm just done begging to be heard." She stared at me like I had grown a second head. We did not last much longer after that. A few weeks later, I ran into someone I had not seen in years. Her name was Kayla. We had gone to college together, same dorm, different worlds. Back then, she was loud, magnetic, the kind of person everyone wanted to be around. I had liked her quietly, never said anything. We bumped into each other at the grocery store, of all places. She was standing by the coffee beans, squinting at a label. I almost walked right past her, but she looked up and said my name like it was a surprise she had been waiting for. We talked. Right there in the middle of the aisle, beside a shelf of hazelnut roast and cold brew kits. And she listened. Not nodded along, half there listening. I mean listened. She asked questions. Real ones. Follow-ups that showed she had actually heard what I said. When I mentioned my work, she said, "Is that something you still enjoy?" Not cool, not nice. She dug. I kept waiting for the usual pattern. For her to cut in. For her eyes to drift. For her to offer advice before I was done talking. But she didn't. She let me finish. Then sat with it for a second. Then responded. It rattled me. Because I realized I had built a wall so high around myself that I did not know how to handle being received anymore. Afterward, we sat in her car for a while, talking. The windows fogged a little. It was raining lightly, the kind of rain that barely taps the windshield. She asked if I had anyone to talk to. I hesitated and said, "Not really." She nodded slowly and said, "That's rough. But it makes sense, the way you talk. You sound like someone who's been explaining himself to the wrong people for too long." I looked out the window. My throat tightened, but not from sadness. It was something else. A kind of recognition I had not felt in a long time. And then she said something that stuck with me. You know, silence can be armor. But sometimes it turns into a cage. That night, I went home and sat in the dark for a long time. No music, no distractions. Just me and that sentence echoing in my head. Was I protecting myself? Or just hiding? I thought I had found peace in pulling back. But what if I had just gone numb? I started paying closer attention after that night. Not just to other people, but to myself. To the way I had gone from someone trying to connect to someone who barely looked up when spoken to. I had become efficient, pleasant, polite, disengaged. The human equivalent of a closed sign flipped quietly in the window. But Kayla's words kept poking holes in that quiet. Silence can be armor. But sometimes it turns into a cage. I kept asking myself, was I protecting my peace or avoiding pain? There is a difference. I just had not known where the line was. That weekend, I got invited to a small get-together, old friends from high school, the type of people you laugh with about things that no longer matter. I almost said no. But something in me was curious now, like I needed to see if anything had changed, or if it was still the same pattern on repeat. I showed up late, wore the kind of expression that said I might leave early. But I stayed. I watched. Same dynamic. People talked over each other, laughed too loud at their own jokes, cut each other off mid-thought, not out of malice, but because they were all just waiting for a turn to speak. But this time, I did something different. I listened, not the way I used to, trying to break in, trying to earn space, but fully, without an agenda. Just listened. And you know what I noticed? Most of them were not really saying anything. Just noise. Stories they had told before. Thoughts they had not actually thought through. Opinions recycled from something they saw online. It was like everyone was stuck on broadcast, and nobody had their radio tuned in. And suddenly, I was not angry anymore. I was not hurt. I just felt free. Because I finally understood the truth. It was never really about me. Their inability to hear me had nothing to do with my clarity, my tone, my timing, or how interesting I was. It was about them. Their filters. Their distractions. Their inability to sit with words that asked for something deeper than a nod. That realization? It was not painful. It was power. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind you carry in your chest like a small, steady flame. After that night, I made a decision. Not a dramatic one. Not the kind you post about. Just something I carried quietly, like a key in my pocket. I decided I would only speak when it felt worth it. Not when it was expected. Not when silence made other people uncomfortable. Only when I actually wanted to say something. And only to people who had proven they would listen. It was not about shutting people out. It was about stop handing pieces of myself to those who never knew what to do with them. A few days later, I had dinner with my parents. Nothing fancy, just takeout on paper plates, like always. My dad asked how work was going. I started to answer, but halfway through my first sentence, he looked at the TV and said, "Hold on, I want to see this part." I stopped talking. He never circled back. My mom asked if I was seeing anyone. I said no. She nodded and said, "You should really put yourself out there. You have such a nice face." I smiled. Said nothing else. Let it sit. They talked for the next hour, about gas prices, a neighbor's new roof, something they saw on the news. When I stood up to leave, my dad said, "You've gotten quiet lately." I shrugged. Just tired of talking to walls. He blinked. Huh. I smiled again. Not bitter. Not cold. Just done explaining. That night, I deleted a few contacts from my phone. People I used to chase down for attention. People who only reached out when they needed a sounding board, not a friend. I did not make a big deal about it. No text. No announcement. Just made room. And in that space, something strange happened. The quiet started to feel good. Not empty. Just still. No more rehearsing conversations in my head. No more playing translator for my own feelings. No more forcing bridges to people who only ever met me halfway, then called it equal. It was not loneliness. It was self-respect. The kind I had never been taught to value. The kind that does not scream or demand. It just stands there. Still. Tall. Untouched by who decides to listen. A few months passed. Life did not change overnight. The world did not suddenly become more kind or curious or tuned in. But I moved through it differently now. Slower. Lighter. Like I had stopped dragging something behind me without even knowing it. People still interrupted sometimes. Still offered advice before I finished a thought. Still nodded while their eyes scanned the room for someone more interesting. But now I saw it for what it was. Not rejection. Not failure. Just misalignment. And that changed everything. One afternoon, Kayla texted me. Coffee? No pressure. Just felt like talking to someone who actually listens. So we met. She vented about work, about her sister, about how exhausting it felt to always be the one carrying other people's weight. I listened, really listened. Not because I had to. Not because I felt invisible. But because she had earned it. When she paused, I waited. Then I said, I get it. Just that. And she let out this breath, like someone had finally heard her exhale. And that was the difference. I still spoke. I still shared. I just stopped offering pieces of myself like I owed them to anyone who made eye contact. I learned that silence is not surrender. It is not a weakness, or a flaw, or proof that you are fading. Silence can be a boundary. Silence can be self-respect. Silence can be your way of saying, I am not performing for you anymore. I do not need to shout to be real. I do not need to beg to matter. And I do not need to be heard by everyone, only by the right ones. So when people say, you have changed, I say, no, I have returned.